Forgotten 5-minute recipes once found only in old cookbooks slipped quietly from our kitchens. These thrifty, clever dishes fed families fast and filled everyday tables with comfort. How did the foods that once solved so much disappear without a trace? Creamed corn and hot dog skillet was the kind of quick meal that families leaned on when time and money were both in short supply. Sliced hot dogs were browned in a skillet, giving off a savory aroma that kids instantly recognized before a can of creamed corn was stirred in to create a creamy, salty base. It was simple, filling, and ready in just minutes, making it an easy solution for weeknights when something warm had to be on the table fast. The sweetness of the corn balanced the smoky flavor of the hot dogs, and the dish could be stretched further by serving it over bread or rice. This kind of recipe spoke to the ingenuity of mid-century home cooking, where canned goods and inexpensive meats formed the backbone of family meals. It may not sound glamorous, but for families who grew up on it, creamed corn and hot dog skillet carries a kind of comfort that only comes from food born out of necessity and love. Peanut butter and lettuce sandwich might sound strange today, but it was once a familiar part of thrifty American kitchens. Born out of Depression-era resourcefulness, it lingered in mid-century cookbooks because it was affordable, nutritious, and surprisingly refreshing. A thick layer of peanut butter spread over bread was topped with crisp lettuce, creating a mix of creamy and crunchy textures. The combination of savory nuttiness with the cool freshness of lettuce made it more satisfying than it might seem at first glance. Parents liked it because it was easy to prepare, while children often found it a curious but filling lunch option. It appeared in school lunchboxes, community cookbooks, and even wartime guides to simple eating, cementing its place in food history. Though unusual by modern standards, it was a clear reflection of a time when cooks stretched simple pantry staples into meals that were both practical and memorable. Velveeta and tomato soup dip was a dish that embodied the comfort and convenience of mid-century American entertaining. By melting processed Velveeta cheese into canned tomato soup, homemakers created a quick, warm dip that could be served with crackers or breadsticks in minutes. It was a crowd pleaser at card nights, community gatherings, and holiday parties, offering something both creamy and tangy without much effort. Velveeta's smooth, melting quality made it ideal for dips, while the tomato soup added a savory base that stretched the cheese further. Guests often gathered around bowls of this dip, scooping up bites while chatting, making it as much a social dish as a culinary one. For many families, it was a go-to recipe because it required no special skill and relied entirely on inexpensive pantry staples. While today's party spreads may lean more gourmet, Velveeta and tomato soup dip was once a symbol of hospitality and the ease of mid-century entertaining. Mayonnaise banana salad is one of those recipes that perfectly captures the quirky creativity of mid-century cookbooks. It involved halved bananas laid on lettuce leaves, topped with a dollop of mayonnaise and sprinkled with crushed peanuts or sometimes shredded cheese. The result was a dish that looked fancy, tasted unexpectedly rich, and could be put together in under 5 minutes. It was often served as a light starter at luncheons, church potlucks, or even holiday tables, where its odd combination sparked conversation as much as it fed guests. The sweetness of the banana clashed and yet strangely worked with the tang of the mayonnaise, while the crunch of peanuts added contrast. Recipes like this showed how home cooks weren't afraid to experiment with unusual pairings, especially when they could make an inexpensive dish seem special. Though it's largely forgotten now, mayonnaise banana salad remains one of those recipes that people recall with equal parts nostalgia and disbelief. Bologna and pickle roll-ups were a popular finger food that highlighted the practicality and humor of American kitchens in the 1950s and 60s. Thin slices of bologna were spread with cream cheese or relish, then rolled tightly and sometimes secured with toothpicks. They were quick to prepare, portable, and perfect for serving at parties, picnics, or casual family snacks. Children loved the salty tang of the pickle paired with the soft meat, while adults appreciated how easy they were to make in large batches. These roll-ups became common in lunchboxes as well, since they could be wrapped and eaten without fuss. They reflected the broader mid-century trend of turning inexpensive ingredients into fun, shareable foods that added personality to gatherings. Though today they might seem more like a novelty than a serious dish, bologna and pickle roll-ups once carried the spirit of convenience and creativity that made American potluck culture thrive. Cottage cheese with pineapple rings was a simple yet elegant dish that appeared in countless mid-century cookbooks as both a side and a light lunch. A scoop of cottage cheese was often served on a bed of lettuce, topped with a canned pineapple ring, and finished with a bright red maraschino cherry. This dish looked cheerful, was inexpensive, and struck a balance between sweet and savory flavors. It became a staple of lunch counters, school cafeterias, and family dinner tables because it was filling yet refreshing. Housewives appreciated it because it required little effort but felt polished enough for guests. For children, the bright cherry and juicy pineapple made it appealing, even if cottage cheese was not always a favorite. This recipe exemplifies how presentation mattered as much as taste, turning simple ingredients into something that felt special. Though it has largely vanished from modern kitchens, it stands as a reminder of a playful, colorful era of American food. Saltine cracker pizza was a playful, makeshift recipe that many children of the 1960s and 70s still remember fondly. Made by topping saltine crackers with ketchup or tomato sauce and shredded cheese, then broiling them for a few minutes, it was the ultimate quick snack. It offered the taste of pizza without the time or expense, making it a favorite among busy parents and resourceful kids. The crisp saltine base, gooey cheese, and tangy sauce came together in a way that felt indulgent, even though it was incredibly simple. Families often made them as after-school treats or late-night snacks, and they became a common recipe in community cookbooks that celebrated quick, thrifty meals. While today it might be dismissed as too basic, saltine cracker pizza was beloved for its creativity and the joy it brought to children who felt like they were eating something special. It was proof that even the humblest ingredients could be turned into comfort food. Egg and vinegar. Dressing salad was a straightforward recipe that brought together everyday staples in a tangy, filling way. Hard-boiled eggs were quickly chopped and mixed with vinegar, mayonnaise, and sometimes mustard, creating a creamy yet sharp dressing. This was spooned over lettuce, cabbage, or even bread, making it a versatile dish that could serve as either a salad or sandwich filling. It was quick to prepare, nutritious, and inexpensive, which made it especially appealing for families trying to stretch their groceries. The vinegar gave it a brightness that balanced the richness of the mayonnaise, while the eggs provided protein and substance. It often appeared in small-town cookbooks and homemaking guides, praised for being both practical and tasty. While it may sound simple, it reflected the mid-century love of efficient recipes that relied on pantry basics. Egg and vinegar dressing salad may have slipped out of style, but it remains a telling example of how thrift shaped everyday meals. Spam and mustard sandwich spread was another recipe that thrived in the era of canned convenience and quick preparation. Chopped spam was mixed with mustard, mayonnaise, and sometimes relish, then spread generously onto bread or crackers. It provided a salty, tangy punch that was both filling and inexpensive, making it a go-to option for school lunches, picnics, or hurried family dinners. Families appreciated it because it could be made in large quantities with minimal cost and effort. The spread stored well and could be dressed up with lettuce or cheese, but it was satisfying even in its plain form. Spam was celebrated in cookbooks of the time for its versatility, and this sandwich spread was one of its most practical applications. While spam recipes are less common today, this spread embodies the no-nonsense creativity of the period, when convenience foods were celebrated for helping families save both money and time. Tomato juice cocktail with celery salt was one of the simplest recipes found in old cookbooks, yet it carried an aura of sophistication in its time. Poured straight from the can into a glass, the tomato juice was seasoned with celery salt and sometimes a splash of lemon juice. It was often served as a refreshing starter before meals or as a mid-afternoon pick-me-up, believed to aid digestion and provide a boost of energy. In the 1950s and 60s, when vegetable juices were heavily marketed as health drinks, This cocktail was a fashionable choice for luncheons and dinner parties. Its bold flavor stood out from sweeter drinks, making it an acquired taste, but one that many adults grew to enjoy. The ease of preparation and minimal ingredients made it appealing for hosts who wanted something quick yet stylish. Though it has been overshadowed by modern beverages, tomato juice cocktail with celery salt once represented a time when even simple drinks carried a sense of ceremony. Peach half with cottage cheese was one of those deceptively simple dishes that found its way into mid-century cookbooks and lunch counters alike. A canned peach half was placed on a bed of lettuce, topped with a generous scoop of cottage cheese, and often crowned with a maraschino cherry for a splash of color. This combination was praised for being refreshing, nutritious, and quick to prepare, requiring little more than a can opener and a spoon. The sweet juiciness of the peach balanced the savory creaminess of the cottage cheese, creating a contrast that appealed to adults looking for a light lunch or side dish. It was especially popular in cafeterias and at ladies' luncheons, where presentation mattered just as much as flavor. The cheerful look of the bright orange fruit and red cherry made it feel celebratory, even though it was inexpensive. While today it might seem outdated or overly simple, peach half with cottage cheese remains a nostalgic symbol of practical mid-century cooking, when canned goods were embraced as modern and efficient. Quick rice pudding with condensed milk was a thrifty way to turn leftover rice into a sweet and comforting dessert. By mixing cooked rice with sweetened condensed milk, raisins, and a sprinkle of cinnamon, homemakers could produce something warm and filling in only minutes. This dish was particularly popular in households that valued frugality, as it repurposed what might have otherwise gone to waste. The condensed milk gave the pudding a rich creaminess, while the raisins added chewy bursts of sweetness. Some cooks served it warm straight from the pan, while others chilled it for a firmer, custard-like texture. Children often loved it for its simple sweetness, while adults enjoyed it as a quick treat that required no complicated baking. Its popularity stemmed not from elegance, but from its reliability and ease, especially in busy households where convenience was key. Though rice pudding has many variations across cultures, this condensed milk version is remembered as an American shortcut that spoke to both resourcefulness and comfort. Hot dog and Velveeta. Quesadillas were a quirky fusion snack that emerged from the growing popularity of processed foods and fast meals in the 1960s and 70s. Slices of hot dogs were placed inside flour tortillas with chunks of Velveeta cheese, then folded and fried until golden. The cheese melted into a gooey filling while the hot dogs provided a salty, smoky flavor that made the dish satisfying despite its simplicity. It was the kind of recipe that appealed especially to children, often served as an after-school snack or quick dinner. Parents liked it because it was cheap, used common pantry staples, and could be prepared in minutes without fuss. Though quesadillas were not traditionally part of American cooking at the time, this version showed how regional foods were adapted into playful, affordable meals. Today it might seem like a novelty, but hot dog and Velveeta quesadillas capture the creativity and humor of mid-century cooking, when making do often turned into something unexpectedly fun. Creamed tuna on crackers was the kind of dish that bridged the gap between snack and meal in countless mid-century kitchens. Made by mixing canned tuna with cream of mushroom or cream of celery soup, the mixture was warmed and spooned generously over saltine crackers. It was quick, salty, and filling, perfect for busy families who needed something hearty in a hurry. The crackers softened slightly under the warm topping, creating a texture that was oddly comforting. Homemakers appreciated it because it stretched a single can of tuna into something that could feed multiple people without much effort. It often appeared at church socials, casual lunches, or as an easy dinner when groceries were running low. Though today it may not carry the same appeal, it reflects the era's emphasis on convenience and the widespread reliance on canned goods and condensed soups. Creamed tuna on crackers was never glamorous, but it filled bellies and created memories of a time when thrift shaped family meals. Fruit cocktail whip was a sweet, colorful dish that blurred the line between salad and dessert. Canned fruit cocktail, with its assortment of peaches, pears, grapes, and cherries, was folded into whipped topping to create a light, creamy mixture. The result was chilled and served in bowls or cups, often topped with extra cherries for decoration. Children adored it because it tasted like candy, while adults appreciated its refreshing sweetness, especially in the summer months. It was a fixture at potlucks, holiday tables, and school functions, where its pastel colors and airy texture made it a standout among heavier dishes. Homemakers liked it because it was inexpensive, easy to prepare, and could be made in advance without losing appeal. Its charm lay in its playfulness, offering comfort and fun with every bite. While modern tastes may lean away from such sugary combinations, Fruit Cocktail Whip remains a nostalgic reminder of a time when canned fruit was celebrated as a mark of progress and modern convenience. Oyster cracker snack mix was one of those quick recipes that turned an ordinary pantry staple into something addictive and fun. Oyster crackers were tossed with melted butter, seasoned salt, garlic powder, or ranch mix, then baked briefly until crisp and flavorful. The result was a crunchy, savory snack that could be poured into bowls at parties, game nights, or casual gatherings. It was far cheaper than store-bought chips or pretzels, making it popular with frugal families who wanted to stretch their food budget while still offering guests something tasty. Children loved grabbing handfuls of the small crackers, while adults often found it hard to stop at just one bite. The recipe spread widely through community cookbooks, where variations with cheese powder or spicy seasoning appeared frequently. Oyster cracker snack mix reflects the era's ingenuity in turning simple, inexpensive ingredients into crowd pleasers. Though it may be overshadowed today by more elaborate snack mixes, its charm lies in its simplicity and the memories it evokes of shared tables and laughter. Maple syrup bread dunkers were a simple but delightful 5-minute treat that transformed plain bread into something sweet and comforting. Slices of white bread were cut into sticks, toasted lightly, and dipped into maple syrup for a quick snack or breakfast. The syrup soaked into the bread, creating a chewy texture that was both satisfying and indulgent. It was a favorite among children who enjoyed the sticky sweetness, and parents liked it because it required almost no preparation. In homes where pancakes or waffles were too time-consuming on busy mornings, this dish offered a quick alternative that still captured the flavor of a special breakfast. Cookbooks and homemaking magazines praised recipes like this for their practicality and appeal to kids, reflecting the era's emphasis on efficiency. Maple syrup bread dunkers may not have the same standing as traditional breakfast foods today, but they remain a fond memory for many who grew up in a time when creativity and thrift guided the family table. Tomato aspic cups were a bold and savory dish that reflected mid-century America's fascination with molded foods. Tomato juice was thickened with unflavored gelatin, seasoned with spices or Worcestershire sauce, and chilled into firm cups or molds. Sometimes diced celery, olives, or onions were added for extra texture. The result was a tangy, slightly spicy salad that was often served as a starter at luncheons or formal dinners. While sweet gelatin salads were more common, tomato aspic stood out for its savory flavor and striking presentation. Hosts appreciated it because it could be prepared in advance and unmolded just before serving, making it appear both elegant and modern. Though today it might seem unusual or even unappetizing, in its time it was a fashionable dish that represented sophistication and creativity. Tomato aspic cups remind us of a period when gelatin was a culinary canvas and no ingredient was considered off-limits. Celery sticks with cheese whiz were a fast and playful snack that highlighted the mid-century embrace of processed foods. Crisp celery stalks were stuffed with smooth, bright orange cheese whiz, creating a salty, crunchy treat in seconds. This recipe appeared in countless cookbooks, advertisements, and homemaking guides as a go-to appetizer or after-school snack. Its appeal lay in its simplicity. No cooking, no fuss, just 2 ingredients combined into something satisfying. Children loved the contrast between the crisp vegetable and creamy cheese, while parents liked it as an inexpensive way to encourage vegetable eating. It was served at parties, school functions, and even holiday spreads, often arranged neatly on platters for guests to grab. Celery sticks with cheese whiz captured the optimism of the time, when convenience foods were celebrated as modern solutions to everyday needs. Though it has fallen out of fashion, it remains one of the most recognizable snacks of its era. Egg drop soup, in its Americanized form, was a clever way to create something warm and filling with very little effort. Canned chicken broth was heated on the stove, and beaten eggs were slowly stirred in to create silky ribbons that floated in the soup. Some recipes added soy sauce or scallions, but most versions kept it simple, relying on pantry staples. It was quick, affordable, and satisfying, making it a popular choice for families looking for comfort food on busy nights. This dish represented the growing influence of international flavors in American kitchens, adapted into a version that felt approachable and practical. It was often served as a first course or as a light meal with crackers or bread on the side. The recipe spread quickly through cookbooks and homemaking magazines, praised for being both elegant and easy. Egg drop soup in its American style remains a reminder of how even simple ingredients could create a meal that felt special. Sardine and onion sandwiches were the kind of no-nonsense lunch that reflected a time when shelf-stable foods were a lifeline for many families. Canned sardines were mashed or laid whole on bread, topped with sliced onions for a sharp bite, and sometimes finished with mustard for extra tang. This combination created a meal that was inexpensive, quick, and packed with protein, making it popular with working men and budget-conscious households. The strong flavors meant it wasn't universally loved, but those who grew up with it often recall its boldness fondly. Recipes like this highlighted the practicality of mid-century cooking, where canned fish and pantry basics stood in for fresh ingredients. While it may not appear on modern menus, it remains a telling example of how American families once built meals around what was durable and affordable. Pineapple fluff dessert was a pastel delight that turned canned fruit into something light, sweet, and fun. Chunks of pineapple were folded into whipped cream or whipped topping, with marshmallows added for extra softness and sweetness. Sometimes coconut or pudding mix was stirred in, giving the dish even more texture. This was the kind of recipe that fit perfectly at potlucks or church dinners, where its colorful look and airy texture made it stand out on the dessert table. Children adored its candy-like flavor, while adults appreciated how refreshing it felt after heavier foods. It took just minutes to prepare, making it a favorite among busy homemakers who wanted to bring something memorable without much effort. Though it has largely faded from today's kitchens, pineapple fluff dessert captures the whimsy and charm of an era when canned goods were embraced as modern and lighthearted sweets were treasured. Apple and cheddar slices were once praised as a wholesome, balanced snack that managed to be both sweet and savory. Crisp apple wedges were paired with slices of sharp cheddar, creating a flavor contrast that was simple but surprisingly satisfying. This combination was promoted in cookbooks and homemaking magazines as an ideal after-school treat for children, offering both fruit and protein in a quick bite. Parents liked it because it required no cooking and very little preparation, yet it felt polished enough to serve at small gatherings or luncheons. The sweetness of the apple made the sharp cheese feel less intense, while the cheese gave the fruit a hearty backbone. It was a reminder of the American emphasis on efficiency, health, and balance in mid-century diets. While simple pairings like this are often overlooked today, apple and cheddar slices remain a nostalgic memory for many who recall their practicality and comforting taste. Cornflake macaroons were a fast, no-bake cookie that turned everyday cereal into something festive and sweet. Cornflakes were stirred together with syrup, sugar, and shredded coconut, then quickly spooned into mounds to set. They required no oven and only a few pantry ingredients, making them especially popular with families who wanted homemade treats in minutes. The crunchy cereal combined with chewy coconut gave each bite a satisfying texture, and the sticky sweetness made them irresistible to children. These cookies often appeared at bake sales, potlucks, and holiday gatherings, where they were appreciated for being quick yet eye-catching. For homemakers, cornflake macaroons were the perfect solution when unexpected guests arrived or when kids clamored for a snack. Though far less common today, they represent a time when resourcefulness and creativity transformed the simplest items into desserts that carried joy and togetherness. Vienna. Sausage skewers were a playful finger food that relied on canned sausages, one of the era's most enduring pantry staples. The sausages were threaded onto toothpicks or skewers with cubes of cheese or pickles, creating quick bites that were both salty and tangy. They were often arranged on platters at parties, picnics, or informal gatherings, where their convenience made them popular with hosts. Children liked them because they felt like a fun snack, while adults enjoyed their easy availability and nostalgic flavor. This recipe showed how canned meats could be turned into something more festive, dressed up for social occasions. Homemakers appreciated how affordable and fast they were to assemble, which made them a reliable option for entertaining without fuss. While Vienna sausage skewers may have faded from today's party spreads, they remain a quirky example of the playful spirit of mid-century American food. Sweetened condensed milk. Coffee cake glaze was a clever 5-minute trick that revived stale or leftover baked goods with ease. By mixing sweetened condensed milk with a touch of vanilla or lemon juice, homemakers created a glossy topping that could be poured over coffee cakes, quick breads, or muffins. The glaze soaked into the crumb, adding both sweetness and moisture, making even day-old treats taste fresh again. Families appreciated it because it reduced waste, extending the life of baked goods and making them feel special once more. Its sticky sweetness paired well with strong coffee, making it a favorite addition to breakfast tables or afternoon snacks. Recipes like this reflected the ingenuity of an era when nothing was wasted and every ingredient was stretched. Today, it may seem like an indulgent shortcut, but it once symbolized both thrift and hospitality, reminding us how homemakers found creative ways to elevate simple food. Frozen orange juice. Whip was a frothy, refreshing treat that captured the bright optimism of mid-century kitchens when convenience foods were celebrated as both modern and magical. Housewives would take a can of frozen orange juice concentrate, pour it into a mixing bowl, and blend it with milk and sugar until it became airy and light, transforming into a dessert-like drink without the need for elaborate cooking. Some versions added crushed ice or were placed briefly in the freezer, giving the whip a milkshake-like texture that felt indulgent yet thrifty. It was especially loved on hot summer days, when families gathered on porches or after church suppers and tall glasses filled with the tangy, creamy mixture were handed out with straws. Children adored the sweetness and fun frothiness, while adults enjoyed it as a refreshing finish to heavier meals. Cookbooks and women's magazines praised its speed, affordability, and presentation, noting how it seemed cheerful and sophisticated despite its simplicity. Today, it's a forgotten recipe, but it remains a reminder of a time when homemakers could conjure joy from pantry staples, turning frozen concentrate and milk into something festive that brought smiles around the table. Peanut butter and marshmallow sandwich, affectionately called the fluffernutter, was one of the most iconic children's treats of the mid-20th century. Thick peanut butter was spread on one slice of bread, marshmallow fluff on the other, and when pressed together, it created a gooey, sticky sandwich that felt indulgent while still inexpensive. Parents liked it because it was quick to make, budget-friendly, and filled hungry kids after school, while children adored its candy-like sweetness that made lunchboxes feel exciting. It wasn't just food, it was a symbol of carefree afternoons, cartoon watching, and childhood play. Many community cookbooks and advertisements promoted it as a modern, fun lunch, proof that convenience could be both practical and playful. Some variations even toasted the bread or added bananas, making it slightly heartier while still whimsical. Though modern nutrition advice may frown on it, the fluffernutter remains etched into American memory as a sandwich of nostalgia, one that defined an era when food was about joy as much as sustenance. For countless families, it was less a recipe and more a childhood rite of passage. Quick-baked bean sandwiches reflected the mid-century American spirit of making something substantial out of simple, inexpensive ingredients. Canned baked beans were heated until thick and spooned generously over slices of buttered toast, creating a savory, filling sandwich in just minutes. The beans provided protein and richness, while the crisp toast gave it crunch, transforming what was normally a side dish into a main meal that satisfied hunger without straining the budget. Families appreciated this recipe because it was fast, affordable, and flexible enough to serve for lunch or dinner, especially on busy weeknights. Children liked its sweetness from the beans paired with the buttery bread, while adults valued how easily it came together with items they already had on hand. Cookbooks from the era often recommended dishes like this as examples of thrift and resourcefulness, showing how nothing needed to be complicated to be comforting. While it may seem humble by today's standards, quick-baked bean sandwiches carried warmth and familiarity, a reminder that even the simplest meals could bring families around the table with satisfaction. Ginger ale. Ice cream float was a bubbly, fizzy dessert drink that made appearances at countless birthday parties, summer cookouts, and church socials during the mid-century years. A scoop of vanilla ice cream was dropped into a tall glass of ginger ale, causing a lively eruption of foam and sweetness that delighted children and adults alike. Lighter than a root beer float, but just as fun, it had a spicy sweet kick from the soda that blended perfectly with the creamy ice cream. Kids were mesmerized by the fizzing bubbles and swirling foam, while parents enjoyed how quickly it came together with only 2 inexpensive ingredients. It was more than a drink, it was an experience, one that turned ordinary moments into something festive and playful. Cookbooks and homemaking magazines recommended it as an easy way to impress guests without effort, highlighting its cheerful presentation in tall glasses with straws. Though it has mostly disappeared from modern celebrations, the ginger ale ice cream float lives on in memory as a symbol of simpler pleasures, when joy could be found in the fizz of soda meeting a melting scoop of ice cream. Apple ring pancakes were straight out of those old Betty Crocker cookbooks and Sunday church potlucks that every neighborhood seemed to have. You would slice an apple into thick rings, dip them in pancake batter, and fry them up on the griddle. The result was a warm, fluffy pancake wrapped around sweet fruit, all ready in under 10 minutes. Kids loved them because it felt like dessert for breakfast, and parents loved them because they used what was already in the fridge. Apples were easy to keep on hand, batter came together fast, and the whole thing cost next to nothing. Some folks dusted them with powdered sugar, others kept it plain, but either way, it was a breakfast that disappeared fast. These showed up everywhere, from rural farmhouses to suburban kitchens, quietly filling plates long before frozen waffles and toaster pastries took over. It is one of those breakfasts you do not hear about anymore. But back then, it was a reliable way to start the day. Creamed corn and hot dog skillet was one of those meals that showed up when time was short and the cupboards looked bare. You sliced up those hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and let them simmer in a can of creamed corn until everything bubbled together. It sounds a little ridiculous now, but back then, it was comfort food at its most practical. This was not a recipe out of some fancy magazine. It came straight from the faded pages of those old spiral-bound cookbooks that every kitchen drawer seemed to have. Families on tight budgets loved it because it made use of pantry staples, and somehow, that sweet corn and salty hot dog combination worked. You could dress it up with black pepper or a little hot sauce, but most folks kept it plain. After a long day, this dinner showed up in 10 minutes flat, filling your belly even if your wallet felt empty. Funny how those quick meals stick with you long after the hard times pass. Cinnamon sugar butter toast was the kind of simple comfort food that could brighten up an afternoon in under 10 minutes, especially when there was not much else to work with. You toasted up some bread, slathered it with butter, sprinkled on cinnamon and sugar, and called it a snack. That was it. Quick, sweet, and surprisingly satisfying when groceries were scarce and everyone needed a little pick-me-up. It sounds simple, but back then, families leaned on recipes like this to stretch ingredients and turn basic pantry staples into something that felt like a treat. The butter gave it richness, the cinnamon sugar added sweetness, and the toast made it crunchy enough to feel special. You would find this little recipe scribbled onto old note cards, tucked into community cookbooks, or passed down through generations as a fast, affordable way to keep kids happy and tummies full. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of homes back then, cinnamon sugar butter toast was the perfect fix for long afternoons and short grocery lists. cabbage and hot dog stir-fry was the skillet lunch that popped up in every budget cookbook from the 1970s, and it stuck around because it worked. You chopped cabbage, sliced up hot dogs, threw them in a hot pan with a little oil, and stir-fried the whole thing until crispy and tender. It was salty, smoky, crunchy, and came together in under 10 minutes. This recipe lived in frugal households, school cafeterias, and quick lunch guides because it used the cheapest ingredients possible and still filled you up. Cabbage was a go-to vegetable for stretching meals, and hot dogs were always around because they lasted forever in the fridge. Toss them together, add a little pepper or hot sauce, and lunch was ready fast. Some folks added onions or garlic, but most kept it simple, just cabbage and hot dogs sizzling in the pan. It was not fancy, but it was reliable, warm, and made sure nothing went to waste when groceries were tight. Maple cream sandwiches were dessert on a dime. All you needed was graham crackers, a bit of maple-flavored frosting or whipped cream, and a few minutes to assemble. Spread the filling between 2 crackers, press them together, and chill if time allows. That was it. No baking, no pans, just a sugar fix made from pantry staples. Maple syrup was not rare in the 1920s, especially in the Northeast, where small producers tapped trees each spring. Imitation maple flavoring also became popular and cheap. These sandwiches were common in homes that needed dessert without making a pie or cake. They were crisp, sweet, and small enough that you could have 2 or 3 without guilt. Sometimes they were topped with powdered sugar or chocolate, but the original needed no extras. It was proof that a good treat did not need much, just a little creativity and a sweet tooth. Cinnamon toast with broiler crisp was one of those forgotten 10-minute breakfasts that once felt fancy, even though it came straight from the bread box. You would take a slice of white bread, butter it generously, sprinkle it with sugar and cinnamon, and slide it under the broiler until the top bubbled and crisped. That was it. No pancake mix, no waffle irons, just the broiler and a little patience. Kids loved it because it felt like dessert. Parents loved it because it was fast, and everyone loved it because it used pantry staples. During the Great Depression and even into the 70s, families relied on simple breakfasts like this to stretch groceries without giving up flavor. The sugar caramelized on top, the bread toasted just enough, and suddenly plain breakfast felt like a treat. You could find versions of it in old community cookbooks, school recipe cards, even homemaker magazines. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of frozen waffles and cereal boxes. Quick potato flake pancakes were one of those practical budget dinners born from the back of old pantry shelves. You grabbed a box of instant potato flakes, mixed them with water and a little egg if you had it, then shaped the dough into small pancakes and fried them up in butter. That was dinner. It came together in 10 minutes flat and filled you up with simple, salty, crispy goodness. These pancakes were a staple of old cookbooks that loved pantry meals you could make fast with whatever was on hand. No peeling, no mashing, no waiting for potatoes to boil, just flakes, water, and a hot skillet. You could add herbs or cheese to dress them up, but most families kept it simple. They were crispy on the outside, soft in the middle, and filled your plate without much effort. This was dinner that made the best of tight grocery budgets and busy nights. Funny how something as humble as potato flakes could feel like a proper meal when you needed it most. Egg in a whole toast was one of those fast, comforting breakfasts that managed to make plain old bread and eggs feel like something special in under 10 minutes. You would grab a slice of sandwich bread, cut a circle right out of the center, toss it into a hot skillet with a little butter, and crack an egg into the hole. That was all it took. The bread toasted up golden, the egg cooked right inside, and suddenly breakfast was on the table without much work or money spent. Families leaned on meals like this when mornings were hectic, paychecks were stretched thin, and everyone still needed a hot meal before heading out the door. It was a staple for school days, early church mornings, or whenever groceries were low but hunger was high. Some folks added cheese or herbs if they had them, but most kept it simple and practical. You would find egg in a hole scribbled on recipe cards tucked into faded cookbooks or passed down by word of mouth through generations. It might feel forgotten today, but back then, this quick breakfast trick kept countless families full, happy, and ready to face the day with just bread, eggs, and a hot skillet. Rice and egg bowls with soy sauce were the thrift store cookbook lunch that turned leftovers into something hot, salty, and satisfying in minutes. You grabbed leftover rice, tossed it in a pan, cracked in an egg, scrambled everything together, and finished with a dash of soy sauce. It was quick, filling, and one of the smartest ways to stretch pantry basics into lunch. Old, thrifty meal guides loved this recipe because it used stuff already sitting in your fridge and came together in under 10 minutes. Some folks added chopped scallions or a little sesame oil, but the classic stayed simple: rice, egg, and soy sauce, fried up fast. It was a go-to for busy parents, college students, or anyone making do with leftovers and a tight grocery budget. The rice got crispy around the edges, the egg brought protein, and the soy sauce pulled it all together. It might not win awards for presentation, but it filled you up and tasted good when you needed a cheap, fast lunch. Cold potato and pickle salad was everything the name promised: cheap, fast, and just sharp enough to wake you up. Chopped boiled potatoes, often leftover from the night before, were tossed with diced pickles and sometimes onions in a mustard-based dressing. There was no mayo in most versions, though families who could afford it might add a little for creaminess. This dish came together fast and was served cold, making it perfect for summer meals, picnics, or quick lunches. The pickles added salt and crunch, the potatoes added bulk, and the dressing brought the whole thing to life. It was a no-cook wonder, ideal for busy families or days when the stove just could not be used. Some homemakers even kept a bowl of this on hand in the icebox, ready to scoop and serve with bread or cold meat. It was not glamorous, but it was reliable, and it filled out a plate without breaking the budget. That was the thing about 1920s cooking. You did not need much, just a little know-how and a good eye for leftovers. Cold rice with milk and sugar was the ultimate make-do breakfast pulled from the back pages of old community cookbooks and family kitchen tables when leftovers were all that stood between you and an empty stomach. You would take leftover rice, pour cold milk over it, sprinkle a little sugar or cinnamon if you had it, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. It sounds plain now, but back then, it was practical, frugal, and good enough to keep you going. Farmers, factory workers, and school kids all started the day with simple meals like this when groceries ran low, but mornings never slowed down. Cold rice was easy to stretch, milk made it creamy, and sugar turned it into something that actually felt like breakfast. Some families tossed in raisins or fruit if they had extra, but most kept it plain and quick. You will not find this breakfast on menus today, but back then it quietly kept families fed with nothing but leftovers and a little kitchen ingenuity. Funny how the simplest meals fade away. Hot dog and Velveeta quesadillas were a dinner shortcut that showed up when there was no time and even less energy to cook. You sliced hot dogs, laid them into a tortilla with chunks of Velveeta cheese, folded it over, and tossed the whole thing in a hot skillet until the cheese melted and the tortilla crisped. That was dinner. It took less than 10 minutes, filled you up, and made the best of whatever was left in the fridge. Old cookbooks and family recipe boxes leaned on meals like this because they were fast, cheap, and comforting. The salty hot dogs, gooey cheese, and crispy tortilla made this simple dinner feel like more than the sum of its parts. You could dip it in ketchup, mustard, or just eat it plain, but either way, it was satisfying. Families on tight budgets and tight schedules loved meals like this. They stretched groceries, came together fast, and kept everyone full. Funny how a tortilla, some cheese, and a hot dog could feel like enough when the pantry looked bare. Baked bean toasties were the kind of quick, hearty meal you could throw together with just a few ingredients and still feel like you had something warm and filling on the table. You toasted up some sandwich bread, heated a can of baked beans, and spooned them over the top with a sprinkle of shredded cheddar if you had it. It sounds basic, but when you were short on groceries and stretched for time, this meal worked wonders. The beans were filling, the toast added crunch, and the cheese made it all feel a little more special. You would see this simple meal show up in New England kitchens, packed into lunchboxes, or scribbled into old cookbooks full of fast, affordable recipes. It was not about being fancy, it was about getting something hot and satisfying on the table in under 10 minutes. Today, people might forget how handy meals like this were, but back then, baked bean toasties filled a lot of hungry bellies without breaking the bank. Baked bean toasties were the humble, hot lunches that turned pantry staples into something warm and satisfying in under 10 minutes. You grabbed a can of baked beans, spooned them over slices of soft white bread, sprinkled on shredded cheddar, and stuck the whole thing under the broiler. The cheese melted, the beans bubbled, and suddenly you had a lunch that felt filling and hearty without needing much effort. This quick meal showed up in old cookbooks, school cafeterias, and busy households when money was tight and grocery runs had not happened yet. It was the kind of food that stretched your budget, filled you up fast, and still tasted good, especially on a cold day when all you wanted was something warm and cheesy. Some folks added hot sauce or chopped onions, but the plain version stayed the classic. Baked bean toasties may not have won style points, but they worked, turning basic ingredients into lunch in record time. Canned peach and cottage cheese plates were a favorite of hot afternoons and light appetites. You took canned peach halves, sweet, syrupy, and already soft, and placed a scoop of cottage cheese in the center where the pit used to be. That was it. Some people added a sprig of mint or a dash of paprika on top for flair, but the basic version needed no embellishment. This dish was chilled, fast, and surprisingly balanced. The fruit gave you sugar and brightness. The cottage cheese gave you protein and creaminess. And together, they made a 10-minute meal that looked more elegant than it had any right to. These plates were common at luncheons and supper clubs, but also at everyday tables across the country. It was a way to use preserved fruit that felt fresh, and it worked especially well when kitchens were too hot to cook. In an era when people were just starting to understand the value of lighter meals and balanced diets, dishes like this led the way. And all it took was a can opener and a spoon. Cheddar grits with butter were the Southern kitchen's answer to rushed mornings when everyone still needed something hot and filling. Quick grits, a little butter, a handful of shredded cheese, and breakfast was done before you even finished your first cup of coffee. It was the kind of meal found in tattered cookbooks, handed down from grandmothers who knew how to stretch a pantry without cutting corners on comfort. These grits were creamy, cheesy, and surprisingly satisfying for something that took less than 10 minutes to whip up. You did not need fancy groceries or a stocked fridge, just the basics. It kept bellies full through school days, work shifts, or long hours in the fields. For a lot of folks, this was breakfast you ate standing up, spoon in hand, on your way out the door. Simple, cheap, and quietly comforting. Grits have stuck around in fancier forms, but this quick, everyday version has slipped through the cracks of modern cooking. Cold beans and onion salad was a no-cook dinner pulled straight from the cupboard that showed up again and again during lean times. You opened a can of kidney beans, drained them, and tossed them with sliced onion, vinegar, salt, and pepper. That was dinner. It might not sound like much now, but when the summer heat made turning on the stove unbearable, it was a lifesaver. These little bean salads filled old cookbooks from the 1930s to the 70s because they were quick, cheap, and practical. The vinegar gave it tang, the onions added bite, and the beans packed enough protein to get you through the night. You served it cold, right from the fridge, and ate it with a fork straight from the bowl. It was filling, salty, and satisfying when groceries ran low and energy ran even lower. Families leaned on meals like this because they worked. They filled you up fast, cost next to nothing, and kept the kitchen cool. Funny how the simplest pantry meals stick around longest. Jelly roll-ups on white bread were a quick, sweet little snack that kept plenty of kids going when there was not much else to pack in their lunchbox. You took a slice of sandwich bread, rolled it flat with a rolling pin or a glass, spread on jelly, and rolled it up tight. That was all there was to it. It sounds simple now, but back then, this was the kind of treat that showed up when families had to stretch every dollar. It was fast, easy, and made use of pantry staples that were always on hand. You would find these roll-ups tucked into school lunches, brought to church picnics, or passed around as after-school snacks when groceries were running low. The jelly added sweetness, the bread kept it filling, and it all came together in just a few minutes. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families, these jelly roll-ups were a quick fix that kept kids happy and parents sane. Cream cheese and olive sandwiches were once the fancy tea lunch that quietly slipped onto regular kitchen tables when people needed something fast. You whipped cream cheese until fluffy, stirred in chopped green olives, and spread the whole mix onto rye or white bread. It sounds strange now, but back then, this salty, creamy combo was considered upscale, especially if you cut the crusts off. It showed up at luncheons, garden parties, and even school lunches when moms wanted to make something that looked like they tried. Old cookbooks listed it under easy entertaining, but most folks made it because it came together in 5 minutes and filled you up without cooking a thing. Some people swapped in pimento olives or added sliced cucumbers, but the classic version stayed simple, creamy, salty, and fast. It may not win over modern taste buds, but for families watching the clock and the grocery bill, these little sandwiches were a retro shortcut that stuck around when time was tight. Celery stuffed with Roquefort or peanut butter was a timeless plate filler. Whether for guests or just yourself, this dish kept showing up in 1920s kitchens. You cleaned the celery, cut it into ribs, and smeared it with a filling. Roquefort if you were fancy, peanut butter if you were not. That was it. No stove, no oven. Crunchy, creamy, cold, and ready in minutes. Hostesses used it to pat out trays, and families loved how fast it came together. The cheese brought salt and tang, the peanut butter brought protein. Either way, it hit the spot. The dish was easy to scale, make 5 or 50. In an era full of molded salads and layered desserts, celery sticks like these kept things simple. They added texture, color, and something to chew on without costing much. Quick, tidy, and strangely satisfying, they earned their place at every table. Buttered cornflake toast was one of those forgotten 10-minute breakfasts that once lived in every kid's cookbook or church bulletin. You would toast a slice of soft white bread, slather it with butter or peanut butter if you had it, then smash some cornflakes on top. That was it. Crunchy, sweet, filling, and ready before the school bus pulled up. It was not some gourmet recipe, just a quick fix that felt special on rushed mornings. Most families kept cereal on hand anyway, and this was a way to stretch it when the grocery budget was tight. Sometimes parents sprinkled sugar on top, other times it was plain, but either way it turned leftover cereal into breakfast that actually stuck with you. You could even swap peanut butter for jam or just plain butter, depending on what was left in the fridge. These kinds of quick breakfasts were everywhere in old cookbooks. Simple, made from pantry staples, and good enough to get everyone out the door without complaints. Sardines on rye with onion and mustard was the kind of dinner that proved you could survive on pantry food and still eat something with bite. You opened a can of sardines, layered them cold onto slices of rye bread, and topped the whole thing with sliced onion and spicy mustard. That was dinner. It was salty, briny, sharp, and came together in minutes without a stove or oven in sight. This meal showed up in old cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards for one reason: it worked. Sardines were cheap, packed with protein, and lasted forever in the cupboard. Rye bread had enough bite to hold its own, and the mustard gave everything a sharp kick that kept it from feeling too plain. You ate it open-faced, with a fork and knife if you felt proper, or just with your hands when time was short. It was quick, practical, and oddly satisfying even when the grocery budget was running on empty. Funny how the simplest pantry meals stuck with us, long after times got easier. Rice and raisin pudding on the stove was a 10-minute dessert that turned humble leftovers into something sweet, filling, and comforting when times were tough. You scooped leftover rice into a pot, poured in milk, added sugar, tossed in some raisins, and stirred it all together over low heat. That was it. In minutes, the mixture thickened into a creamy, sweet pudding that could stretch a small amount of rice into a treat for the whole family. It sounds simple now, but back then, every leftover counted, and recipes like this helped families avoid wasting a single grain. You would find rice and raisin pudding scribbled onto recipe cards, tucked into community cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations. It was a clever way to stretch ingredients, keep kids happy, and turn plain staples into something that felt like dessert. Most folks kept it basic, but sometimes a sprinkle of cinnamon or a dash of vanilla would show up if the pantry allowed. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families, this quick stovetop dessert was a saving grace when groceries ran low and everyone needed a little sweetness. Tomato jelly sandwiches were not meant to be sweet. These were not breakfast jams. Tomato jelly was savory, made by boiling tomato juice with vinegar, salt, and just enough gelatin to hold its shape. It was poured into molds, chilled, and sliced like meat. Then it was layered between bread, sometimes with lettuce, sometimes with mayonnaise or cream cheese, always served cold. The texture was curious, but the flavor was sharp and bright. Molded foods were popular in the 1920s, and gelatin was no longer a luxury. Recipes like this showed off clever presentation and stretched ingredients farther. These sandwiches were ideal for picnics and hot days when turning on the stove was not an option. Strange by today's standards, but in their time, they made perfect sense. Cottage cheese with canned fruit cocktail was the speedy, no-cook breakfast that lived in every 1970s diet book and homemaker guide, promising light meals that took barely any effort. You would scoop cottage cheese onto a plate, pour canned fruit cocktail over the top, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. Sweet, creamy, and surprisingly filling, it worked when mornings were busy, but everyone still needed something practical to eat. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries were tight, and dieters swore by it for being low effort and satisfying enough to skip the fancy recipes. It was a trick you could find tucked inside women's magazines, diet plans, and community cookbooks trying to stretch fruit and dairy into a real meal. Some folks added nuts or honey, others kept it plain. But either way, it quietly filled countless tables before frozen meals and boxed breakfasts took over. Funny how those quick, reliable meals slipped away. Boiled egg and sweet pickle sandwiches were the fast, quirky little dinner that came together in minutes when you needed to stretch groceries. You mashed up boiled eggs, mixed them with diced sweet pickles and mayonnaise, and spread the whole thing between slices of soft white bread. That was dinner. It sounds a little strange now, but it filled you up, stretched a carton of eggs, and cost next to nothing. These sandwiches showed up in old cookbooks from the 1940s through the 70s because they were practical, easy, and satisfying. The eggs added protein, the pickles gave sweetness and crunch, and the soft bread pulled it all together. You could eat it plain or toss in a little pepper if you wanted to dress it up, but most folks kept it simple. These were the dinners that filled plates fast, stretched budgets, and got families through tight times. Funny how the oddest little combinations stick with you long after the hard years pass. Canned chili over saltines was the kind of quick meal that got dinner on the table fast with hardly any effort, especially when the cupboards were running bare. You opened a can of chili, heated it on the stove, and spooned it over a pile of saltine crackers. That was all there was to it. It might sound plain now, but back when budgets were tight and groceries were stretched thin, this quick, salty, filling meal showed up on plenty of kitchen tables. The saltines soaked up the chili, adding crunch and making a small amount of food go a whole lot farther. Some folks dressed it up with shredded cheese or onions if they had them, but most kept it simple and practical. You would find this recipe clipped from old magazines, scribbled in community cookbooks, or passed along by word of mouth from one busy family to the next. It was never about being fancy. It was about keeping everyone full with what little you had. Today, it is one of those forgotten meals. But for plenty of homes back then, canned chili over saltines made dinner happen fast. Leftover meatloaf sandwiches with ketchup were the reliable lunches that showed up in fridges across America the day after dinner. You sliced cold meatloaf thin, layered it onto soft sandwich bread, added a squirt of ketchup, and called it done. It was fast, filling, and made sure that last night's dinner stretched just a little further. Meatloaf itself was all about using affordable ingredients, ground beef, breadcrumbs, eggs, and stretching them into a meal for the whole family. Turning leftovers into sandwiches was the next logical step, and it worked. You got a hearty, savory lunch ready in under 10 minutes with barely any effort. Old cookbooks loved suggesting it. Lunchboxes were packed with it, and kids grew up knowing exactly what was coming after meatloaf night. You could add cheese or lettuce if you had them, but most families kept it plain with just meatloaf and ketchup. It might not sound glamorous now, but back then it was the fast, frugal lunch that kept families fed and made every bit of dinner count. The asparagus and egg salad was one of those elegant-sounding dishes that was really just smart use of canned food. You drained canned asparagus spears, chopped them into bite-sized pieces, and mixed them with sliced boiled eggs and a tangy dressing. Sometimes it was just vinegar and oil, sometimes mustard and herbs. But it was always fast, cool, and surprisingly filling. This dish became popular not just for its taste, but because it looked fresh and green even in the dead of winter. Canned asparagus gave a touch of luxury to households that could not afford fresh greens often. The eggs added protein and weight, turning the salad into a complete meal in 10 minutes or less. It was often served on a bed of lettuce or with crackers on the side, and it became a go-to for ladies' luncheons and quick Sunday suppers. Like many 1920s recipes, it made the most of pantry goods and added just enough flair to make you feel like you were eating something special, even if it came straight from a can. Which of these forgotten bites would you revive? Share below and be sure to like and subscribe for more hidden kitchen classics.